Hello, welcome to Webinar 4 in our series, Supporting Children Affected by Prenatal Substance Exposure. My name is Brenda Farrell, and I am a project analyst at the Abandoned Infant Assistance Resource Center. Today's webinar, titled Shame, Guilt, and Fear, Understanding and Working with the Complex Feelings of Mothers of Substance-Exposed Newborns, is presented by Ida Spielman and Amy Sommer. Ida is the clinical director of the Center for Early Relationship Support. She holds a certificate in infant mental health and has also developed Early Connections, a program of home-based mother-baby psychotherapy for dyads facing early relationship challenges. She is currently involved in 2 projects at the center in support of families facing the dual challenges of early parenting and substance use recovery. For the development of Project NEST, she led a year-long needs assessment process that included a qualitative interview study of the experiences of 21 mothers of substance-exposed newborns. Ida has served as a consultant to early intervention, early Head Start, and healthy families. She is in private practice in Newton, Mass., with a specialty in issues of pregnancy and parenting. Amy is a clinical coordinator at the Center for Early Relationship Support. Her expertise is in attachment-based interventions for infants and parents. She has practiced and supervised in home-based healthcare addiction treatment settings, and she has provided training to local, national, and international audiences on dyadic work through a number of lenses. Recently, Amy has focused on training providers from medical, social service, and graduate programs on supporting families impacted by addiction. She also has experience both providing as well as training others in interventions for perinatal depression and program evaluation. Will be answered in the order in which they are received. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ida and Amy. Thank you for being here with us today.
Welcome. This is Spielman.
And I'm Amy Sommer.
And we're glad you joined us today for exploration of our work, and we've valued this opportunity to think together about what we're learning about our intervention with moms in recovery, and so we'll get started. So we've packed a lot into this, and we'll kind of see how it goes, and hope you'll bear with us if we're talking quickly at certain points, and trying to get a lot into one presentation. But we wanted to start off bringing you in close with a excerpt from one of our qualitative interviews of a 37-year-old mom who's single, Caucasian. She had a 4-year-old daughter who was her only child, and crack and shooting heroin during her pregnancy, was homeless and living under a bridge, as you'll hear. So there's a brief excerpt to bring you in close to the experience of the moms that we're going to be talking about today.
So I found out I was pregnant, and actually I checked into detox is how I found out I was pregnant, and I went to the emergency room, and No, I continued to use when I found out I was pregnant from the detox because I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I didn't stop. I don't know. I kept using for about a week because I really thought I was just going to terminate the pregnancy, and I went to the emergency room to see how far along I was, and they told me I was about 18 weeks.
Do you remember how you felt?
Horrified because I had no home. I'm thinking if I have this baby, it was going to be something wrong with, wrong. I was smoking so much crack and chewing so much heroin. But every time I was smoking crack, I was throwing up. Evidently, the baby, the fetus, was not enjoying it. It was making, it was like a reaction to being pregnant. So, yeah, I was scared. And I thought if I had the baby, something was going to be wrong with the baby. And if I didn't have the baby, nothing was ever going to change. I recall a couple weeks before that, I was under the bridge and crying and praying. I thought something has to change, and I need help, and I need to get out of there, and I'll do anything to get out of there. And I just needed, help, and God, please help me. And at that time, I was already pregnant, and I didn't know it. And there I'm praying to God to help me. And so, like I said, I found out I'm pregnant, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, this is help. This is a way to change my life. This is a way to get my life on track, to do the right thing. And I can take it or I cannot take it. Take it, the help, and change my life and do the right thing. Because I know the only way I'm going to change my life and do the right thing is to have this kid. The only way I'm going to do anything right is to have to take care of someone else instead of just myself. Because at that point, my mom was dead, one of my brothers had died, my family was just split up. There was no reason for me to live. There was just nothing to live for, nothing. Just stay under that bridge and do drugs. That was my life.
When you were going through all this and all these changes, what were your thoughts about being pregnant? And
it was scary. I thought something was going to be wrong with her because of all the drugs. I was afraid, they grow their eyes and their brain and it's developing and all these body parts are developing. And what was I, smoking crack at that time, or was I shooting dope at that certain time of that brain part? Or, I'm thinking, did I damage something, or would she have mentally retarded or something?
So Carla's pregnancy continues and her baby is born. She continues the story of her pregnancy. Baby struggled with some symptoms and stayed in the NICU for about 8 days. How did you feel about her being there, and what was your feeling about her and yourself as a new mom?
Hard. I hated leaving her there. It was hard. Very first time I left her there, I was up all night crying like a puppy, like a dog that lost its puppy. I sounded like a wolf. It was horrible. I was crying, and then it was horrible. I was here and my baby was there and she should be here with me, and it was empty and it was sad, and I was lonely and empty and sad, and I wanted my baby with me.
I wanted to begin with that because we feel like that's been the voices of the moms we work with are so important for us to listen to, and I think you can hear in that excerpt the complex feelings that we're going to be talking about in this. But we wanted to really start with just kind of a framework in terms of some of our core beliefs in work. Our fundamental ideas about the work we do is that it's relationship-based and that all levels of relationship matter and affect each other. In infant mental health language, we call this parallel process, that these different mirror each other, staff relationships with each other, clients' relationships with their clinician or provider, and their relationship then with their Our work is informed by attachment theory and an understanding of trauma. The work from both attachment and trauma research, understanding of the ways that difficulties that parents have impact the parent-child relationship and get passed on from one generation to the next. I believe that change happens in the context of a relationship, supports shared exploration, and also that supports the cultivation of curiosity and reflection. And we believe in that both in our work with staff and in our work with clients. And that translates in practice to asking lots of questions and doing a lot of wondering, which you'll hear, I think, in our a lot more questions than we have. And additionally, in terms of some core beliefs, we love this quote from God, there's no such thing as a baby. And the quote goes on to say where there's always a baby and someone. So that's find a baby, you find parental care or an adult. We chronic disease, brain functioning, contrast to it being a moral failing or simply a matter of poor life choices, and that it can be managed. our words matter, and I think both in terms of the words we hear from our clients, that those are important to hear, that our words have an impact.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the intervention from which we've drawn a lot of our material today, but I'm going to start out by talking about its roots and kind of how we got here. And I want to say that the Center for Early Relationship Support, where Ida and I work, is part of a larger agency, Jewish Family and Children's Services, and we're lucky to have all of these services sort of in one home. And I know that many of you listening will be thinking, well, I don't have the services on this slide in one place, but I think it could be helpful to just think about where we're drawing from and where you might find kind of inspiration or support or partnership in your community. So I'm actually starting at the bottom there. The Center for Early Relationship Support, as we mentioned, houses all the programs I'm going to talk about. As we mentioned in our introductions, Early Connections is a program that Ida created to support the needs of parents with mood difficulties during the perinatal period. Moving clockwise, Visiting Moms is actually our oldest program here. It's over 25 years old, and it's a program of volunteer moms in the community who visit with new moms to offer kind of support and mentoring. And that's, you'll hear, one of the pieces that we've really brought into our work with moms impacted by substance use disorders is this idea of the importance of a mentor, of a guide, of a peer relationship. You'll see up there on the left our little bird that could be an angel. Nest is funded by private dollars, and we'll talk some more about the creation of the intervention, but people always ask, how are you funding this? So we feel like we should put that out there up front. Project Bright is an intervention that has federal funding. We are 5 years into various federal grants offering support to infants and parents affected by substance use. We began by offering treatment to women in residential treatment programs. So we had women who were, often had multiple attempts at recovery, had lost custody of prior children, and were really seeking that higher level of care to get the support that they needed to achieve sobriety. I'm actually going to skip over Nest just for a minute and go down to the bottom right. Fragile Beginnings is our program supporting premature or medically fragile infants who have stays in neonatal intensive care units. And that program's also been around for a good long while. So again, we felt like as we were building an intervention to support moms impacted by substance use disorders in the perinatal period, we had sort of legs to stand on with the intensive care nurseries where so many of these babies spend time. We had professional connections and some sense of what that journey could be like for parents. So we were able to bring all our learning together to create Project Nest, which stands for Newborns Exposed to Substances, Support and Therapy. Ida gets full credit for the name, and we don't ever spell it out, not ever, but we don't usually spell it out for clients. They just know it as Project Nest. But the acronym works for us. And we're offering really two kinds of intensive support to parents. We're offering that peer support that I touched on, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and we're offering clinical support, in-home infant-parent therapy, kind of based on that Early Connections model to support parents in early recovery. So that's kind of our foundation, but we were very lucky when we were beginning to design Project Nest to take an entire year and really learn from peers and learn from women in recovery themselves what might be helpful. So as we mentioned in our bios, Ida was really instrumental in creating a qualitative interview study of women in recovery. And we partnered with the Boston University School of Social Work, and Dr. Ruth Paris is our partner there, to really design a set of questions that would get to women's hopes and needs, and we'll talk some more in depth about the interview study. We also met with key informants in our community. You can see there kind of a range of providers really trying to understand what they felt women in that early parenting time needed for support. We are really lucky to benefit from kind of the writing and research of some giants in the field, and in particular Nancy Suckman's work on the importance of reflective functioning in parenting and early recovery, Marta Velez's work on the non-pharmacological support for infants and parents during the perinatal period, and work on understanding the voices of women and vulnerable women in recovery as well as in other populations. Of course, the AIA and other national organizations have been great places where we've really learned, and we took a couple of cases from some of the other service areas that I mentioned, some of our mental health cases and our fragile beginnings cases, and really found moms who were also impacted by substance use and created kind of pilot cases where we could really slow down and see what we were learning from each case along the way. I want to give a little bit of depth about the interview study just because we will be talking and pulling a lot from the interviews. So I mentioned that it was a qualitative study, so open-ended questions for mothers whose children were young. And we chose that because we feel like for two reasons. One, we wanted the memories to be fresh and the stories to be fresh. And we also feel like in this state, and we know across the country, the context is really changing. And having a baby in the last couple of years, particularly if you've been on medication-assisted treatment or been using opiates, has a really different sort of set of implications that it might have 10 years ago in terms of the policy and the hospital and all those kinds of factors. And in general, we wanted to hear about the emotional experiences of pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum. That's some of what we're going to touch on today. Interface with service systems, what women wished that systems could have done for them, what they found frustrating, what they missed out on. And then reflections on what women's ideas were for what would be helpful. So we were very explicit that we were designing a project, and we would say something like, we're interested in supporting women who might be in a similar situation to you. We'd like to know what you imagine could have been helpful. As you can see, we conducted 21 interviews across our state. Most of the women we interviewed were Caucasian, and that reflects the demographics of women who are in substance use treatment in our state. So we felt that sort of for the population we were trying to design the intervention for, we had a good sample. You can see a pretty big age range, and you can see that most were identified themselves as polysubstance users during pregnancy as well as before pregnancy. The majority of the moms we interviewed were on medication-assisted treatment by the time that we interviewed them. Some had weaned off medication-assisted treatment, and a few had were sober without medication-assisted treatment. And just to say that I think the process of doing the interviews, Ida and I were interviewers as well as two of our colleagues, was very intense. There was lots that was shared, but we left really feeling that for most of the women, the experience was a positive one. You can see these two kind of reflections. It's good to have someone who cares to listen to my story. It's good to remember where I've come from. So we felt that even just in telling their story, women found something that was helpful and positive for them. I'm going to shift gears now and move into some of the core feelings that we want to bring you close to today. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about each of the three kind of main thematic feelings that we want to touch on, really trying to bring you in close with some quotes, some case material. Not that I think most of the listeners haven't identified these themes in work that you've all done, but to really give us a chance to sort of slow down a bit and really sit with each of these feelings and really take in what it is for clients to hold these feelings with us. And then Ida is going to conclude the webinar with some particular ways that we've found it helpful to make work out of these feelings, to really shift from difficult feelings to intervention and to sort of positive forward-moving work. So the first feeling that we've really identified is the feeling of guilt. We think of guilt as negative feelings related to a particular action that you've taken. And you'll see here we split up the feelings of guilt and shame. They're very interrelated, and it's not as if we sit around clinically and think, well, is this guilt or is this shame, and how should I label this one or that one? But we do feel that there are some differences in what women are expressing to us about what they've experienced. Guilt is often connected in the research to feelings of causality. So I feel bad that I did that action because bad things happen afterwards. And you can really hear it in the voices of women that we work with when we think about women's understanding and worries about their babies, right? So we meet with women very often in intensive care nurseries who are standing and watching their babies, sometimes with symptoms of withdrawal, who are really struggling with these feelings of guilt. Because I used or was using or decided to use methadone to help me in my sobriety, now my baby is suffering. And that real struggle inside themselves with personal blame seems to be pretty powerful. It also seems to be evoked when we read through the interviews when other people are evaluating women negatively for their actions. So we know in our society that there's so much stigma around being pregnant and continuing to struggle with addiction and recovery. There's lots of stigma still about being pregnant and using medication-assisted treatment to maintain your recovery. And so we, time and again, talk with women about their feelings of guilt that are evoked because of their actions. I feel guilty because I'm using methadone. I feel guilty because I needed Suboxone to have, or Subutex to have a healthy pregnancy. That's where we sort of hear guilt in our work. A couple of quotes just to kind of give the flavor. I always felt like if I was to tell a doctor or tell somebody that I'd be so judged and looked at like a piece of crap for having a newborn and having a drug addiction. Another woman says, I didn't know who to tell. I thought if I told somebody, I'd be walking around with like a big letter A on my chest. So what do we sort of make of this when we think about women who we've met with and who we've seen clinically? I want to tell just a little brief vignette of a woman I saw named Keyshia. And Keyshia presented as she was someone we saw in a residential treatment program, and the residential treatment staff were very worried about what they understood as her anger. She didn't want to be there, she didn't want to be in treatment, and she certainly didn't want to hear anything that the residential treatment staff had to suggest to her. She seemed to have a lot of difficulty holding her baby when she first came into the program, really physically held her baby kind of far away from her, struggled to be close to her when she was feeding her, and there was a lot of work to be done. And I worked with Keyshia for about a year and came to really understand who she was and some things, about her. But I think one of the most revealing things is something that she said in a qualitative interview after the intervention. She said to the person who was asking her about our intervention, she said, it was hard for me to hold my baby, knowing that I was messing up, meaning relapsing. So I think here we see someone who is able to say at the end of intervention, my behavior, what people saw as difficult and pushing away of help and pushing away maybe of my baby, was really related to my own guilt about continuing to struggle with relapse. And I think we see and hear about those feelings so often in women that we work with, that a sense of distancing, of pushing away from, of not wanting to talk about, can really feel to us, and sometimes I think to women themselves, as sort of denial or minimizing, I can't go there. But if we sort of put a lens of understanding where guilt might be playing a role, I think it can help us to think about what the women's evaluations of her own actions might mean and might be getting in the way of in terms of treatment work. I want to say the other place that we really, hear about guilt, as I mentioned, is when we talk about how babies are doing, and women who worry a lot about the evaluation of their babies, whether it's by a pediatrician or an infant toddler program, and are defensive and kind of, my baby's fine, because I think as we come to know moms and understand them, they have a lot of guilt about the ways that their infant may have been impacted by substances they were using during pregnancy. So shifting to shame, again, to kind of bring you in close to what we're hearing and understanding about the experiences of shame. It was one of the most common interview themes that we found in our work. And we're understanding that as really an internal evaluation of oneself as a worthless, invaluable, inferior person. So where guilt is typically understood as connected to actions, the feeling of shame is really understood as connected to kind of my self-concept and understanding of myself. This quote, I think, is really helpful. The intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. And I think if we think about that in terms of a treatment context, and particularly a treatment that we're offering that's free, that's voluntary, we're home-based, so we're coming to you and saying, we want you to have this service, we think you could benefit from this service, we think this might be good. I think when we think about the context of shame and feelings of shame, it can help us understand why at the beginning forming relationships can really take quite a lot of time and gentle, careful effort, because our feelings of sort of, there's something worthwhile here and we want to offer you something might be really coming sort of directly into conflict with a woman's own feelings of, I'm not worth it. I'm not worth anything. I should say we talk with women sometimes about safety planning, and it's very interesting clinically, I think. We have women who can talk a lot with us about the ways that they want to keep their infant or their baby or their young child safe, and the plans that they have and the ways that their support systems can do that. And we have a fairly sort of harm reduction-based lens, and so we will say, okay, so that's great that you have those plans to keep your baby safe. What about you? If you go back out there on the street, if you pick up again, are you going to be safe? And the amount of work that it takes, I think, to really help women understand that we care very much that their baby is safe, but we care just as much that they are safe is really easier to kind of sit with in the context of a woman's sense of shame. I'm going to read you a couple of I guess I'll say first that some of the research around shame that I think is useful to think about when we think about clinical work is that research is showing that shame is really connected to the way that we form memories, the way that we form relationships, and the way we manage our mood. So as we see women who struggle to tell us a coherent story about their past, to really piece together, well, I did this and then that caused that, and this is what happened and then that happened in this relationship, I think sometimes that can be challenging to sit with, and I think that it's helpful to keep in mind that when women are experiencing, and men, when people are experiencing deep feelings of shame, that their very sort of ways in which they cognitively interact with the world can be impacted. We're using the internalized shame scale to measure shame. We'll talk a little bit about how we're evaluating our program, but just to mention that we really have come to see it as an important part of what we hope to shift in women's experiences. So a couple of quotes. I never realized how bad it was until I was actually pregnant and doing all of these things. I mean, I was disgusted in myself. Another mom says, I got pregnant with my second son when I was in the grips of my disease, and I couldn't stop. And I thought I was the only person on the face of this earth scumbag enough to use while pregnant. These are sort of, I think these quotes really reflect kind of the depth and pervasiveness of these feelings for women. I'm going to talk briefly about a woman I saw who we're calling Tammy, who I think was marked by her experiences of shame, by her evaluation of herself in so much of the work that we did together. Tammy had a very precipitous birth. Her son was born very quickly. She was on a pretty significant dose of methadone, but had been clean for about 6 months. And when he was born, she had some very powerful emotional experiences herself. She was probably a little bit dissociative. She was very overwhelmed. She was very, very glad to see her son, but found some of her own traumatic experiences really impacting on her ability to sort of stay present in the moment. And she reported some of these symptoms to a doctor who felt that she might benefit from a prescription for sleep medication. knowing that she was on a significant dose of methadone, prescribed an additional medication, and on his second day of life, Tammy dozed while she was holding her son, and he was injured. He was removed from her care and placed in foster care, and Tammy remained in a residential treatment program for women in recovery. And so I started seeing her there. I had met her and her son at the hospital, but saw her every week, sometimes with her son and sometimes without, depending on her visitation schedule with DCF. And what I began to notice was the difficulty that Tammy seemed to have during visits with her son in really claiming her space as his mother. She very quickly, when he would arrive for his visit, would ask if I would like to hold him, would hand him to me, and quickly comment on how happy he looked and how content he looked. And of course, as a clinician, here I am trying to do exactly the reverse and kind of point out the ways that she is connected to her son and the ways that she can understand him and know him and, really step into the mothering role. And it was very, very painful for her to do so. And as she and I got to know each other, more and more I came to understand that her evaluation of herself and sort of who she was as a person who wasn't worth the title of mother really came into focus. Tammy had cared for a relative's small baby for a time when she was doing well in recovery and her relative was active in their disease. Tammy had cared for that little one for about a year, and then herself had relapsed and had brought the little one to the Department of Children and Families, which is our family services agency, and relinquished custody. And we can look at that as an incredibly brave and responsible choice for the care and safety of her little, the little one that she was caring for. But I think for Tammy, the sense of herself as not worth it, as not enough to be called mother, was very, very deep-seated and took really the year that we spent together with her visiting for her son for her to find ways to identify herself as a mother. And I think a core piece of our clinical work was really week in and week out noticing the ways that she was enough, that she was something to her son, that she was a valuable and worthwhile person to him and in her own right. And one of the things I held in mind is that, there were times in the treatment when I wasn't so sure if they would be reunified, not because of any particular concerns, but just because it could be a challenging process and, as we all know. And I wanted to hold in mind that if it came to be that Tammy wasn't to parent her son, that I wanted to leave her with a sense of herself as worthwhile, again, not just as a mother, but as who she was, and understanding who she was, what she was about, what she was good at, what brought her joy or peace or comfort was a really important part of our work. And we made that very explicit together. And we talked about how we were talking about an experience she had enjoyed in high school or a relationship that had meant quite a lot to her, because we together wanted to understand the pieces of her that were valuable and important and worth knowing. So the last experience we want to bring you in close to is the experience of fear. And I think we could all probably sort of define fear for ourselves, but in a particular context, I want to talk about the fear that we hear and feel from the mothers that we work with. So the first sort of kind of fear that I think we feel and hear about is the fear around who my baby will be. And you heard it in Carla's story that we read at the beginning. Who will this baby be? Will this baby be okay? And Nadia Bushweiler-Stern, who is a wonderful infant mental health clinician and researcher, has come up with the context of the hoped-for baby and the feared baby, that anytime someone is expecting a baby, they have hopes, right, and fantasies and kind of positive identifications as well as fears, and that's a typical part of motherhood. But for the moms that we see, the fears about who this baby will be is really, even more pronounced. Have I damaged this baby? Is this baby, struggling because of what I've done, what parts of this baby won't be okay. The real worries that moms have are very prominent for us. Dr. Bushweiler-Stern has done a lot of intervention in neonatal intensive care units, and this is something that she says about the role that medical staff have in helping mothers identify either their hoped-for baby or the baby they fear. She says, in the mother's eyes, the maternity staff has an expertise such that whatever they say during the first few days may get indelibly engraved in her mind. I think that's such a powerful reminder for those of us who come into contact with moms during the early days, that any comment we make can really evoke either the hoped-for baby, the positive identifications, or the feared baby. And we think about, for babies who are born exposed to opiates, they are evaluated, right, every few hours for symptoms. They're not evaluated every few hours for strengths. They're not evaluated every few hours for the ways that their mothers might feel positively about them. They're evaluated every few hours for diarrhea and fussiness and crying and things that are really challenging then that I think can really evoke the feared baby that moms are holding inside of themselves. So we just, in no way are advocating for not using scoring in hospitals, but just really want to hold in mind the meaning of that for moms when we see them and those of us that work in kind of those healthcare settings. I think, fear, of course, relates in turn to experiences of trauma, to experiences of anxiety and phobias. So the cases we see often, women have difficulty managing kind of affect around fear and worry in ways that seem really heightened to us on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, when we think about the context of fear that women are in recovery and parenting in, I think it can sort of shift from maybe a diagnostic, this person has an anxiety disorder, or this person has a particular phobia. That may be true, but it's also often the case that women's fears have some basis in reality. And I think it's worth mentioning, even though it's, all of us know this, sort of any new mother, the primal fear has to be that I am not a good enough mother and that I might not parent this baby. I mean, that's, again, sort of foundational to maternal mental health in any parent. Am I going to parent this baby successfully, and is this baby going to be okay? And of course, for the mothers that we work with, there are very real, powerful systems asking those very questions and often implying that the answer may be no. No, we're not going to let you parent this baby, and no, your baby might not be okay. A couple of quotes from the interviews that I think really evoke this kind of the loneliness and the distress that can come from fear. You just feel alone in a world full of people, You just kind of feel like you're battling an army of somebody that wants to take your baby when they're born. Another mom says, I worried. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be a mom, and I can barely take care of myself. But, I just was afraid to, I'm thinking, it's real stressful. You got to worry about taking care of someone and loving them enough. I think you can hear in these women's voices, the ways that very real worries about the Department of Children and Families, about the health of their babies, get kind of woven into this love, that what that last woman says, am I going to love them enough? Here's a quote kind of reflecting on the fear related to what doctors said about a mom's baby. She could have been lack of oxygen, or she could have come out small, and they were concerned because she had a big head, so they were like, well, it could be a lot of problems. She could have problems with her lungs, or it could have been a lot of deformities, that you might not see through the outside, meaning through an ultrasound, but inside the baby. So I was like, wow. And I think holding that much anxiety during pregnancy is important for us to think about. Very briefly, I want to tie in here, when I talk briefly about Erica, one of the particular pieces of our intervention. So Erica is a mom who we met quite early in her pregnancy and had the opportunity to work with for about 3 months before her baby was born. And a lot of the work with Erica was around her fears. She was very anxious about how her baby was doing, whether her baby would be okay. That feared baby was very present in her mind. And we understood that one of the factors that was contributing to her fear was that she had not been able to talk to anyone except for her obstetrician about her substance use disorder. She had not talked to her partner. He knew she had a history, but not that she had relapsed and then was on medication-assisted treatment. She had not talked to her parents. She had not talked to any friends. So she was really quite alone in holding these worries. And we partnered or paired her with one of our mentoring moms. If you remember back at the beginning when I was talking about Project Nest, we offer clinical support and paraprofessional support. And our mentoring moms are moms who are themselves impacted by substance use disorders in long-term recovery themselves, who can meet with moms and really make it very explicit, very spoken about that I have struggled with addiction, I have parented, I am parenting, and I am here to walk this journey with you. And the ways in which we have come to find that really has helped women navigate through their fear, talk about their fears, explore them openly, has been really quite powerful. So Erica was able to talk with her mentoring mom about who she had told and who she hadn't told and why, and really name how very, very frightened she was. With her mentoring mom's support, was able to make plans for talking to her partner. She was able to visit the hospital and see the NICU and really, I think, come into really close contact with kind of what are your fears and what are the sort of the worst case things that you're imagining, and how can we understand them together, and who is the DCF worker, who would be meeting you, and who is the social worker at the hospital, and really trying to, with her gently over those few months, move some of those fears aside so that there was space for other work to be done. And Erica had a beautiful, healthy baby and told many of the people in her support system where she was at in her recovery, and had a very successful outcome.
Thank you, Amy. I'm sure as you're feeling, we're trying to integrate a lot of different material and concepts here. So, okay, great. So in shifting, we're going to take a look at some of the in more detail at some of the pieces of our approach to our work and what's involved in really thinking about helping women in their journey to deal with these difficult, complex feelings. So we wanted to start with really thinking about the context for our work with shame, guilt, and fear, and what is our stance, what is the therapeutic approach that we have. So we aim for a sense of being open, being curious, being non-judgmental, and these are all like wonderful qualities and we feel are very important, but it's really an aspirational stance. And we know that often what we are hearing is very difficult to hear, so that it may not always be so easy to be open, and that we're also human beings, and we do have assumptions and we do make judgments. So how do we manage these challenges to staying open, to staying non-judgmental? And I want to just mention two significant pieces of management that we think about. So one is we think of as mindful self-regulation, and this is a concept from the Fussy Baby Network that Linda Gilkerson founded. And mindful self-regulation really refers to our own work as providers, as clinicians, in noticing our own feelings and finding a place of calm, developing strategies to deal with those feelings in a mindful way so that we can be present, we can be curious and open. So mindful self-regulation is one important strategy. And secondly, we have a very deep belief in the role of reflective supervision, that bringing these experiences, these judgments or assumptions or difficult experiences in the work is very important, to have a safe place to talk about those and explore them. So we'll move from thinking about kind of the context to thinking about the process. And of course, the first piece of process in our work is engagement, which we've called kind of the long and winding road, which I'm sure you all I imagine, can identify with. Project Nest is not a one-size-fits-all model. It's not an evidence-based manualized model. We're very flexible in in where we see our clients and how often we see them and how long we work with them. And we have this phrase, persistence through discomfort. We try to really work through the challenges that we're feeling to continue to work at engagement and to continue to persist at it. We expect ambivalence from the clients we work with. We don't expect them to be, oh yeah, this is a service I've always wanted, I'm on board. We expect there to be uncertainty and avoidance at times, and we also expect layers of truth. We don't have black and white thinking in terms of this is truth and this is lies. We really think in terms of a process of getting to know the different layers of truth. And I always think about a client who Amy saw on intake who said quite innocently to her during the intake visit, I can't remember who I've told what to. And she was quite, she was really saying that in a very innocent way, but it indicated, a level of, she was managing who knew what, and that was important to her in a way that she'd learned to survive. We have come to understand that some of the difficulties in engagement in our project come from the way that Nest and our providers really represent both parenting and substance misuse, and that can be very hard for some of our clients to have they want to keep these parts of themselves separate. They want to go to a parenting group and they want to have their, methadone or AA meetings or whatever it may be, and not have those two parts kind of joined. And I think of a client of ours who really needed to present herself as a loving parent, but knew that we were aware of her struggles with relapse, and so she would agree to appointments and then cancel them and avoid them. So we really try to hold in mind that those kinds of difficult behaviors, cancellations and avoidance, are reflective of these underlying feelings, often of shame, of guilt, of fear. And we have a graphic of an iceberg that captures some of this, that portrays some of this. So you see above the water the behaviors and how important it is to hold in mind that that's just what we see on the outside, and that inside are these very difficult, complex emotions. And that I think that can help us, going back to thinking about mindful self-regulation, it can help us remember, okay, I can understand this and find a place of calm, find a place of empathy. So moving into kind of treatment itself with our moms, we have identified 3 components of the therapeutic work that we believe are central in supporting mothers in moving forward. One is building narrative coherence, a second is a focus on the mother-baby dyad, and a third is supporting emotion regulation. We'll start with building narrative coherence, and here I've just tried to tease out kind of the major questions that we hold around helping moms develop a coherent story about their lives. So when and how is it important to help a mom create a coherent story of her life, to bridge the parts of her life she wants to leave behind with her current hopes and plans? So there we get at these questions of timing and import, and that we really try and hold those things in mind. How do we support the integration of multiple selves into a whole? And how do we help moms feel strong enough to tolerate our knowing the dark places they've been, traumas that they've suffered, and sometimes the hardest, potentially traumas that they've caused? So I'm going to share a case that I think brings us into some of these struggles. So this is Ellen, who is a 28-year-old Caucasian single woman who was referred while she was pregnant and living in a residential treatment program. She was the oldest of three. She'd been a strong student in school and began college after high school. She had a marijuana habit that had developed in high school, which helped her feel less shy and lonely. She was introduced to heroin during college and began using regularly, building up to a costly $100 a day habit that resulted in her stealing from family members. She had always struggled with feelings of shyness and not belonging and found that using heroin helped her to not care about those worries. She had tried detox and programs without success. And before her pregnancy, she had gotten involved in an abusive relationship. When she went to the police, her partner was eventually jailed, and Ellen decided to try and get clean again. She went to detox, and at that point, at admission, she learned she was pregnant. She seriously considered abortion. She felt terrible about the circumstances of her pregnancy, but decided to continue the pregnancy and went on methadone. She completed the treatment program and had a healthy baby girl soon after. So in our work, the themes of shame and Ellen's relationship to her past history and its consequences are prominent. She used the word embarrassed. She didn't use the word shame, but she used the word embarrassed with great frequency. In particular, she was embarrassed about being pregnant in such a different way than she had always imagined, because she was pregnant by a man who is now in jail and who represented a very dark time in her life. She didn't want family members to know the circumstances of her pregnancy and assumed others would see her as trashy. That was her word. So I had many questions about how best to help Ellen with feelings of shame, difference, and isolation. Towards the end of her pregnancy, we talked a lot about her loneliness and her wishes for more connection, but she felt she didn't belong anywhere. And I think you heard in Amy talking about the sense of not deserving to belong, how much that's an element of shame, and it definitely was true for Ellen. And we know that motherhood, both motherhood and getting clean, being in recovery, they're both involved social challenges, and these were huge obstacles, and then her shame further isolated her, and the shame also led her to minimize and justify her actions. Described that period of her life as, quote-unquote, not me, or as being off track, and she wanted to focus on the future. She didn't want to talk about, oh, that wasn't me, or that was when I was off track. But it seemed important to me to work towards some sense of a coherent story to her life, a way of understanding the times of being off track, so these different parts of herself could be more whole. So we were slowly able to begin to talk about these complicated experiences and these experiences she had, so much shame attached to, or embarrassment, as she called it, and we came to understand that her turning to drugs had really been a solution, a way to regulate difficult feelings that she was having around loneliness and difference and not belonging. And, to not care about those things basically is the way that heroin had helped her. Marijuana had made it easier for her to feel that she did belong, and then heroin made her not care whether she belonged or not, is the way we came to understand it. And our relationship became more one she could count on, and she was able to open up about her own hurtful behavior to others, expressing remorse about her pattern of lying and stealing, and her rejection of her closest long-term friend during her time of using. And then most powerfully, really, the birth of her baby offered a powerful opportunity for integrating the past, the present, and the future, and having more coherence in her story, because she had this new little person in her life who she came to be able to love, and yet recognized that this baby's father represented the past that she most had wanted to forget or wipe out, and now couldn't. So the baby was really a healing opportunity for her. And I think the message that we tried to give is, we can hear your whole story, not just the parts that are on track. So we'll move to kind of a second component now. So there's narrative coherence, and now we'll move to focus on the dyad. But I think you could hear in Ellen's story how much that was a powerful impetus for coherence on her part. And it can serve a lot of different kinds of roles when we turn our focus from kind of the mom's story to the present mother-baby relationship. When we work in, sitting on the floor with the mom, sharing just moments of observation of what the baby's communicating, what the baby is able to do now, we can think about three things that work offers, and it probably offers more as well. But, I've identified respite, regulation, and competence, so that it can give mom a breather from heavier topics that she may have been talking about. It can also bring her to the present moment, which can be very regulating. She can be, maybe having some PTSD symptoms or, struggling more. And when you bring her to focus on the baby and maybe, match the baby's breath or whatever, it can be very regulating for the mom. And it can also build competence because she can be the expert on her baby. You can be asking the mother, what do you notice? And, how's it been this week? And, what is she doing that's new? With moms who are in recovery, focusing on the dyad has a very significant, we believe, brain-based rationale and justification. Because as we've come to understand addiction and its impact on the brain, we understand that the brain circuitry for pleasure has been hijacked by substances, and we can imagine that the focus on the mother-baby relationship as a source of pleasure can potentially repair those brain circuits and offer new pathways for finding pleasure in parenting and in being with the baby in fun, pleasurable kinds of ways. Lastly, one of our learnings has been that when we focus on the dyad, this is for thinking about moms who may have lost custody of previous children, that they can have the experience that parenting this particular baby can be successful, and that this may open up treatment possibilities. We have had a case in our program of one of our clinicians working with a mom who had terrible trauma history and was parenting her third child, but really her first experience of parenting as the older ones had been removed. And our clinician came up with this idea. She thought the mom was doing a great job and the baby was really responding to her. And the clinician started, with the mom, they talked about this, they started a photo project. And the clinician would bring her camera and take pictures of the mother and baby, sometimes just the baby, sometimes just the mom, and bring those pictures back the next week. And at one time, the mom was looking at a photo of her baby, looking at her with a smile, and said, I never had that with my older children. And she had never talked about parenting before, and the experience of loss and grief that she had. So it was this opportunity for a kind of healing, and again, of narrative coherence that came through, and a way for her to deal with her shame. So thirdly, we wanted to talk about emotion regulation, and just briefly kind of why do we do that? What is our understanding of the importance of emotion regulation for the dyads that we work with? We can think about substance use itself as a disorder of emotion regulation, and that the research shows that there's deficits in the regulation, particularly of negative affects, are associated with substance use disorders, and so that individuals who are struggling in recovery often have compromised capacities for managing difficult feelings. And at the same time, substance-exposed newborns are often challenged themselves in regulation. So their sleep may be challenged, their ability to move from a distressed state into a calmer state, and this may be part of a vicious cycle between mother and baby, where the baby's distress triggers the mom, which makes it harder for the baby to be calm. And we love this sentence from Marjuka Pajulo: the substance-exposed mother and child are difficult regulatory partners for each other. So you have an infant who needs more parental help, and at the same time, a parent who has less capacity for offering that help because she has trouble tolerating distress and potentially less capacity for even understanding the communication. So you see that both partners really need help in self-soothing. We just have a question about the potential role for infant massage in this, since it can be potentially a soothing intervention for both mother and baby. So how do we build emotion regulation skills? As I said, really it's a central process in recovery, and certainly a central process in parenting. Just think about a crying baby, parenting a crying baby or an angry toddler. We need to be able to regulate our feelings. The first, goal or strategy or whatever we want to call it, kind of frame that we use, is really to make space for knowing and tolerating distress. So we try really not to avoid difficult affects. If the mom is angry, if the baby is really upset, we really try to explore those things, get to know them, make the relationships safe to have those experiences within. And to contain those in the work that we do. And then a couple of kind of more specific strategies. Really, we aspire to a mindfulness stance. This is lifelong. This isn't something that, you just, I'm just going to, adopt these mindfulness strategies. Things like noticing feelings without judgment or fear. Very, very challenging, but something that we really talk to parents about, notice when they're, judging themselves for something that they're talking about, and, we might wonder and question that, like that was a feeling, you were angry at that moment, or you felt guilty at that moment, and how do we understand that, and then kind of moving into this notion of self-compassion, really identifying these things as very human, that are the clients we work with are part of the same human community that we are, and we think of this as promoting self-compassion to help our moms turn the same kind of compassionate stance that they might have towards a friend who was suffering towards themselves in their own suffering. So I want to just really briefly talk about, Amy talked about fear and the feared baby and the fears that we hear so often from the moms we work with. And I want to talk about a different experience of fear that we see in some of our clients. And so when early trauma happens, when early experiences of being terrified in childhood are ignored or disparaged or controlled, used as a tool of control or even to terrorize. I think of a mom who remembered, her father laughing when he would throw her under the water. I mean, it was a game to him, but not to her at all. And so for some adults, for some children, this can lead to in adulthood kind of a pervasive sense of hypervigilance and anxiety. But there are others where it leads to a dampening of the fear response and not attending to situations that are potentially one should be afraid of. And I think of a client who I saw who had really had a traumatic childhood, and she had very compromised capacities for keeping her own body safe. She was not only involved in addiction, she was involved in prostitution and violent relationships. And with her son, she would minimize his need for her, when he was afraid, she would kind of, ignore him or, make light of it. Or if he was in a potentially harmful situation, she often didn't notice. And when we work with that kind of dampened fear response, we feel it's so important to make those connections between the past and the present. Like, of course it's hard for you to see that this is a scary situation for Junior because, no one responded to you when you were scared. You didn't know about scared except that was something not to feel and to develop real defenses and coping with. And at the same time, to really I worked with this mom to really help her kind of think about in a more sort of less reactive way, sort of, okay, what was that situation, and was that dangerous or not, or how dangerous might it be, and share maybe even my evaluation of it, which might not be accurate, but because sometimes there's not an accurate view. Everyone has different barometers around danger. But it offered the opportunity for us to be talking about evaluating situations for danger. So to just kind of wrap us up here, I think you've heard through all of this a lot about the value we place, kind of back to the beginning, the value we place on relationships, and relationships can hurt, but they can also heal. And we, both our clinicians and our mentoring moms, offer the possibility for a different kind of relationship than many of these moms had in places in their lives, where they can feel accepted, feel part of humanity, and where we hold hope for them. And particularly, Amy was talking about our mentoring moms, and they have a special role in this because they can offer a model of a successful journey to healing. And in this process, we feel that shame, guilt, and fear can be named, they can be known, they can be shared, and that this brings them from the dark to the light. So we want to, and I guess we have left a lot of time, which we're happy for questions, thoughts, comments that you have to share with us from your work. We have plenty of work we can share, but we also know that we imagine that you have questions and cases and experiences that this is bringing to mind for you. So we look forward to that dialogue.
Thank you so much, Ida and Amy. We do have a few questions for you. Our first question is, how did you recruit the mothers in your sample, and do you think that they are representative of substance-using mothers?
So, it's a really good question. And so we recruited through flyers and word of mouth with colleagues. And I don't think they're representative of substance-using mothers in general, because, as Amy said, the majority of our mothers were in medication-assisted treatment at the point that we were interviewing them. That was just an access point that was much more available in terms of both having colleagues and gathering places where women might be. So I'm sure that there was a skew in the sample in that way. And obviously it was also women who were interested in talking about their experiences and reflecting on them with us. So in those ways, I'm sure that there were, we certainly missed women who were acknowledging actively using at the time, or so in that way it wasn't, we didn't try to do a scientific sample, and I'm sure it wasn't scientific either.
Okay, great. Do you involve spouses or partners, or the children's dads in treatment?
That's such a great question. So I could just answer it in 2 words, and we'd be really quick, which is, of course, it depends. So one of the roles that I have with the project is doing most of our kind of initial phone contact and intakes with moms, and it is moms who are referred. For the most part, we have occasionally had a dad who is referred. When I meet with a mom, it's very much part of my role to think with her about who her supports are, who might want to be involved in the treatment. I had a mom actually just this morning ask if she could think about signing a release so that we could invite her grandmother into treatment, because her grandmother is a big part of her maternal role model, and she wants her grandmother to have a place to ask her questions about medication-assisted treatment. So just getting to the partner piece, is there a role for this partner in some of the work? What might that be like for mom? What might that be like for mom if we imagine with her, and we will say out loud, right, and kind of valuing that belief of saying things out loud. So I can imagine that you might want dad here for these visits now. I can also imagine that might not always be the case. What shall we understand together and talk about together in terms of times when you may want not to have dad there, whether that's because you want to kind of really connect with maternal identity, or because dad has relapsed, or because this is a domestically violent relationship, and we think of violence not just physically but psychologically and emotionally. So very, very, very complex questions. I guess the other way of answering that question is, we can decide whether we want to involve a dad or a partner or not in treatment, but also a mom gets to decide. And so we show up for visits, and there's the partner, and, kind of being able to negotiate that. We show up for visits where there may be people who we don't know. There may be times when we wish a partner wasn't there so that we could have a conversation about how things are going in the partner relationship. We're learning a lot, I think, about the ways that, because only the female partner can be, is involved in the pregnancy, not involved, but only the female partner has the pregnancy. And so typically those are the partners that are drug screened, right, first and frequently during pregnancy. And so there are complex ways in which moms that we work with will talk with us about, I'm the one that they know is using, or, I'm the one that got into treatment because they found out I was pregnant. What does that mean for the other partner? Whether the other partner feels angry towards mom, it's okay that I use, but you are carrying our baby, or feels protected by mom, right? As long as they're looking at you and drug testing you, then I'm kind of flying below the radar. So there's a lot of complexity in what we see in both the partner relationships and the other family relationships. We have had, as I said, a couple of dads referred where they've taken primary custody of an infant, and then, you can really think of it in reverse. So if we have a dad who's a primary client, and what does he want in terms of who's involved in his treatment? So we never say no to a dad as a referral, but when we think about who's involved kind of in that, beyond the dyad, beyond the parent-infant dyad, that's a much more complex question.
Great. What is the name of the article by Gilkerson?
Oh, so Linda Gilkerson, the best is probably to go online to the Fussy Baby Network website. So there are several articles listed there. I'd have to look at which one. It probably was from 0 to 3. But but the website talks about mindful self-regulation in all the presentations that are on there, or the articles that are listed. And we can also put together, we didn't, but are happy to put together a list of our references to share with people, so we can do that as well. So we'll put that on our to-do list to make sure that we get that, so you can so everyone can have access to the materials.
And I just shifted our slides there to include our email addresses so that that people know that we are open to those kinds of emails or other emails as well. But certainly, if you're looking for a particular reference or a particular author that sounded interesting to you, please don't hesitate at all to reach out.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Someone asked, when addressing recovery and parenting, groups tend to be a part of treatment. Were groups included in your study? I guess that's what they're asking.
Well, not in our there was the needs assessment that included the interview study, and all of those interviews were done individually, one-on-one. So in our program, in Project Nest, in the services now that we've moved out of kind of needs assessment phase into intervention and services. And we would love to do groups. We know that they could have a lot of power in terms of, when you think about Ellen's story and case and the questions about belonging, she felt like she didn't belong with, the other addict community, but she didn't belong in a regular new mothers group. And we have often felt that it would be quite a positive thing to be able to bring moms together. Our challenge is really geography. So we cover a very large area of eastern Massachusetts, and just the logistics of offering a group and transportation and all the kind of challenges of scheduling. So we tried, and we probably should continue to try and try again because we know there's potential there. We've been particularly wondering about the possibility of offering a circle of security group. And so that's something that's still on our minds, and we'll keep people posted on if we're able to do that. And also would love to hear from people who have had successful experiences of bringing moms in recovery together around parenting. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think we have partner agencies that we work very close with who are methadone treatment providers, and many, though not all of them, offer a group focused on either, pregnancy or parenting, and we sometimes kind of consult with those folks and fit in with those folks. And obviously, the nice thing about a methadone clinic is that's where people are gathering. So we offer sort of out in the community, we tell methadone treatment providers that we're happy to provide groups on site there because that is a natural gathering point. But even, the moms that we see probably spread across 8 different methadone treatment providers plus, 4 or 5 different buprenorphine providers. So it's something that I think we absolutely see the value of and keep in mind. It's something that sometimes the mentoring moms work with moms on if they're not connected to a group through their place of recovery, whether they're not doing medication-assisted treatment, they're not part of a home group for NA or AA. Are there other parenting groups out there that you might feel were a particularly good fit, whether it's in your neighborhood or for moms who are breastfeeding or moms who are involved in early intervention? So I think it's very much part of a really good understanding that it's a valuable intervention for moms who are feeling so other and so separate, and something that we offer here at the Center for Early Relationship Support for other populations that are a little more geographically concentrated. I think right now, I think I can think of one intake that I've done in the past 2 months where the mom has access to her own transportation. It's a huge barrier in the population that we are not close enough to be using, public transit for all of our families.
Could you say more about the mothers' experiences with the systems they were involved with and what they said could have helped them better?
Sure. I think we can both answer this. And yes, we didn't, because we were really trying to focus on these complex feelings, we have done some broader kind of presentations in the past that really focused on the findings from our interview study. And I would say that many of the moms experience their experiences with providers as judgmental, blaming, and we have some pretty poignant quotes about that. But also there were moms who talked about positive experiences with providers, and particularly providers who helped them anticipate what was going to happen. One mom talked about how prenatally she got to tour the hospital and see where the baby would be in terms of the NICU and how they did scoring. So there was a lot of preparation that she had in a very kind of non-shaming, kind of matter-of-fact sort of way. That was the exception, but it also, I think, was we use these kinds of positive quotes in our training with healthcare providers to really show them how powerful their role can be in a positive way. In terms of other ideas for help, one of the reasons, we'd had the idea of having paraprofessional mentoring moms, but the interview study was very significant in confirming that direction for our program design, so that we heard in the interviews both needs for clinicians, because the moms had trauma histories and a lot of difficult experiences mental health-wise, but they also talked very directly about wishing that they'd had someone really to be on their journey with them, someone who had been there and knew it. So that was a significant learning in terms of the help that people.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we're experiencing, kind of certainly statewide, and I imagine is a very familiar feeling, is that women both appreciate the help that has been sensitive to their dual roles as someone in recovery and as a mother. So if they're in a parenting group at a methadone clinic, if their OB refers them to an NA meeting, where providers can recognize that women often need support, and all of us really need support in accessing different kinds of services, was identified as very helpful. And, the flip side of that coin is that often we heard stories during the interview study and continue to find in our clinical work that women experience services as siloed. And, we have experiences with social workers from the Department of Children and Families who are really unfamiliar with medication-assisted treatment, which is a huge part of opiate treatment in our state and in many others. We have, doctors who are giving conflicting or different information about, for example, whether it's safe to breastfeed. So there are ways in which our system, breastfeed while you're using medication-assisted treatment. So there are ways in which women find that the fragmentation of services and this kind of siloing of services is very challenging. And we very much heard that, I think, in our interviews and, again, in our clinical work, and see our role and talk explicitly about our role as being where it's, helpful and wanted, kind of tying services together and really being a voice between the many identities that mom is shaping for herself, and thinking about, yes, you are pregnant and you are in recovery, and what questions do you have about pain management during labor and delivery, and what questions do you have about whether you'll be able to stay in the NICU if your baby should need to stay there, and really anticipating the ways that services kind of ideally could be connected and sometimes don't always click together.
Minutes left for a couple more questions. What is your approach in regards to appointment compliance? This is a huge challenge, both for our antenatal consult and then parents bringing their babies to the follow-up clinic.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. I think of the slide that Ida was showing when we talked about engagement and kind of this long and winding road. And part of the long is often the infrequency or irregularity of appointments at the beginning. And again, we understand that in the context of complex feelings. So, what might be challenging about coming to an antenatal consult? There's that feared baby probably living very front and center in mom's mind. And what is it that you're going to tell me or ask me that I might not be yet ready to integrate into a whole, into a sort of here and now understanding of who I am? And then, again, thinking about the antenatal consult and the postpartum clinic visits, and we think about, or I think about often, the role of guilt, and if my baby is eligible for early intervention because they are delayed in a particular area of their development, what does that say about me? What does that say about what I have done and what I am responsible for? And that's not, I'm not saying that I think that moms are necessarily responsible for or have caused, but I think it's a very real part of what moms experience. And so we certainly find that kind of having a long view of the unfolding of those feelings and the importance of relationship in unfolding those feelings is really what can make the difference over time. It was a few months ago we were presenting some of our longest term cases, so cases that we've passed a first birthday and are into 15 months of weekly or not, but ideally weekly contact. And actually, it was interesting, all three cases that we happened to present that day had this kind of long and winding engagement period where we had to keep showing up. We had to keep saying, I understand you can't see me this way. And I want to really acknowledge that that's not something that every service provider can do. And certainly, if you're billing for your services, if you have a long waiting list, there are ways in which balancing those challenges is very real in a different kind of way. But I think in terms of how we understand it, it's really related to the women's experience of engaging in a new relationship, and we make that a spoken about, talked about part of the work.
Okay. How do you see women cope with having existing ties to their previous life in the fathers of their children?
How much time do we have left? This is a very rich question.
We do have a few more questions. I was wondering if you could go over by a few minutes. Do you have time?
Do we have time? Yeah, we have time. So I think that this was part of what I was trying to bring to light in terms of thinking about narrative coherence. So it had to do with so do you want to maybe repeat the question so I make sure that I'm actually answering what's
yes.
specifically asked?
How do you see women cope with having existing ties to their previous life in the fathers of their children?
Yeah, so I think you heard in Ellen's case one way of coping, which was to try to cut off. She wanted, in fact, while she was pregnant, she said she was going to be the single mother. She didn't want the father, he was in jail at the time, she didn't want him to know about the pregnancy or to ever have any contact with this baby. And because there was a restraining order, I mean, he wasn't listed on the birth certificate. But once the baby was born, she actually went through a transformation to really thinking about the baby's experience, less about herself and her own kind of shame and need to kind of like disavow those not me times, those shameful times, and more about her baby's needs. And we were able to think together about a plan for how she might want to let him know about this child of his. So that's one kind of anecdote. I think that one of the things that we're learning a lot about, because we're finding we have to, is about domestic violence and relationships of control and verbal abuse particularly. And So, we're really immersed in kind of the complexities of the intersection, really, of domestic violence and substance use, and the ways that plays out differently in so many cases, and, can be just extremely poignant when, moms want to be out of a relationship that they know isn't good for them, and yet are tied to that relationship in terms of a child and the child's father. So, a lot of complexity. I don't know, Amy, if you have another thought or.
Yeah, I mean, again, just to say, I think part of what we were sort of touching on when we were asked earlier about involving dads. So sort of, it's not, it's not always cut and dry, dad's involved or not involved, and what that means from sort of week to week, and what mom's wishes might be, or what her fears might be. I think, being really open to talking about, as Ida touched on when she was describing this case, everything from, do you know who the father is? Do you want the father to know that he's the father? Will he be on the birth certificate or not? Will you pursue paternity or not? Material support, child support or not? And down the road, what do you imagine you might talk with your child about? And I think when we go back to the slides that Ida shared around sort of clinical intervention, one way that focusing on the dyad can be helpful, I think, in building narrative coherence is really having conversations about, as Ida just touched on, what would you like your baby to understand or know one day, right? At some point, for every kid, they're going to realize that it takes a mom and a dad. And at some point, they're going to have some questions. And I think we don't shy away from talking that through with mom in the here and now. She may not need those quote-unquote answers for many number of years, but just exploring what she hopes to say or not say or hold in mind or distance herself from about her partner is very, very real. We know the 12-step model of distancing oneself from the person, places, and things that were involved in their addiction is really important, and it is one piece of the work. And yet, when that person is connected to you by biological ties, that distancing is going to be different and more complicated.
Well, I think we are out of time, so we're going to close it out now. I would like to thank Ida and Amy for speaking with us today, as well as all of the participants on today's call. The link for a brief evaluation form will appear shortly. We truly value your feedback, so please take a few moments now to complete the form. We would like to get everyone's feedback, so if you're joining in this call as part of a group, please be sure that each member of your party receives this link. Also, if you need a certificate of participation, please complete the evaluation form. That's the only way that you will be able to get one. This closes our 2015 webinar series. You can always access this or previous webinars on our website at aia.berkeley.edu. Thank you again.